Well, the biggest economic event of the year, the Union Budget 2023, is right around the corner, and the wish list, as always, whether from citizens, corporates or deal makers, continue to be quite high. But what could the government actually deliver to propel growth without losing the balance with respect to its fiscal deficit? Let's try and decode that with a battery of guests and experts on the panel today. We have with us Mr. Rohinton Sidhwa, the partner business tax, Deloitte India; Sarika Malhotra, India Tax Manager at Cargill, as well as Mr. Raj Khare, the CFO at Floor Daniel India Private Limited as well. Guys, thank you so much for joining us here on ET Now. Appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Anisha.
Rohinton, let me start with you. You guys at Deloitte have done an extensive pre-budget survey to try and understand what is the ask from corporate India, plus what could the government actually do. Can you talk to us about what the key findings are as far as that survey goes?
Sure, Anisha. So I think the biggest thing that came out from the survey is the confidence that most of the people who were surveyed had about the rate of growth that we are going to be seeing in our economy. And almost 60% said that we would be growing at more than 6.5%. And that's a very significant and strong signal that we are poised for growth. Also, a significant number talked about the Atmanirbhar Bharat scheme. Almost 90% said that scheme has delivered results and should be extended and can continue to deliver growth in terms of both domestic demand as well as capital expense. The other thing that was really called out as part of the survey is the confidence that people had around the PLI scheme, which is the production linked incentive scheme that the government of India has launched, and especially people within the specified sectors like food processing were very gung-ho about the scheme the benefits realized under the scheme. The other thing that was being talked about is obviously no surprises, expectation that there would be more incentives and rebates and lower tax rates. But also another thing that came out from the survey, remember we surveyed most of the people who were part of corporates. There seems to be an expectation that there would be the rollout of group taxation in this time's budget. And that means that if you are a large conglomerate, instead of filing multiple returns, you could file a single consolidated return. Also, the survey very significantly asked the government that the biggest ask is to simplify tax compliances for corporates in India.
Let me bring in Sarika into the discussion as well. Sarika, what do you think can the government do to spur the foreign inflows into the country as well? Of course, there's this capital tax as well as a gains angle to it. But apart from that, what could the government do to increase the inflow into the country?
Sure, Anisha. Thank you. I think there are a few aspects that the government can touch upon. One could be, the recent amendments on significant economic presence and equalization levy. So these concepts and sections were brought in by the government to basically capture, the e-commerce operator who are non-residents and they are, doing business and operations from India. Now the language of the section doesn't appear to capture only those people. It appears from the language that they are also targeting the non-resident, that section of people who are just sort of selling goods and services to India on a principal-to-principal basis, and they're not sort of facilitating these transactions. So maybe, government can simplify and clarify that those people are excluded. This will definitely, bring in certainty to them, at least on this aspect. Another thing that government can do on the return filing exemption. So we all know that, there is already an exemption which exists for the non-resident companies who specifically earn certain specified kinds of income like interest, royalty, FTS. But the catch is that they have provided this exemption only for the companies whose tax has been deducted under the income tax provisions. Now, a non-resident by its basic rule is, eligible to lower of those two tax rates which are provided in the Income Tax Act or the treaty. So generally, people have their preference to take the treaty rates which are lower and beneficial. Now the tax return exemption filing doesn't provide that particular aspect, that If the TDS is deducted and they're discharging their liability under the treaty, then also they are not liable to tax return filing. So that clarity or that certainty can be brought in by the government here.
Let me bring in Raj into the conversation as well. Raj, what are some of those problem areas that you face as, from the face of corporate India as well? Is capital gain rationalization something that you are expecting as well in this budget?
Thanks, Anisha, and thanks for asking this question. Since I come from service sector, my answer is going to be around that particular sector itself. And before I go to capital gain related asks that I have from the government, let me give a little bit of background, set up a background so that you can understand a little more as to where I am coming from as far as my ask is concerned. We all are aware that World Bank has recently upgraded its forecast for India's GDP growth from 6.5% to 6.9%. And that has happened only because of the sound performance that India ANC has shown in Q2 of 2023. And that is not the only thing. Service sector's contribution to India's GDP growth is more than 50%. So that is, though in last couple of years' time, because of the COVID situation, there has been a little bit of an adverse impact on the performance of the service sector, but still the sector has stood up, and its contribution to country's GVA is still more than 50%.
Rohinton, if you could first help us understand what was the section, what was the reason it was introduced in the earlier budgets. There were some incentives given to the new domestic capacity that were added as well. And is there a case to be made that this could be extended to services as well as at the undertaking level rather than just the new units?
Sure, Anisha. So I think the 15% is a clear indicator that India is a player in this particular area, and they are looking at becoming a significant manufacturing location. And the 15% is meant to be a kind of a sweetener for people to come and invest in global manufacturing capability within India. Now, this window, as Raj also pointed out, opened up in October of 2019 with the budget at that time, and it continues up to March 24. Obviously, this seems to be meant to cover new capacities being created and new investment being made in the manufacturing sector in India. Now, there is one element of taxpayers who would feel that's a little unfair, that existing companies who already have capacity expansion in India ought to be excluded from this particular benefit. And that's a call that many taxpayers have been making, is there a way in which the same benefits can be extended to existing companies? Now, one simple way of giving the benefit to an existing company is to treat the new manufacturing capacity being set up as a separate business, and then computing profits from that business and applying the lower 15% rate on those profits. But another option would be for an existing company to simply set up a new domestic company which would then manufacture and create that new capacity under that separate legal entity. Now, both these options perhaps could perhaps work. The setting up a separate entity sometimes could be viewed negatively by the tax authorities because of another set of rules which are called the general anti-avoidance rules, where if an existing taxpayer sets up to take the benefit of a lower tax rate, it could be viewed negatively by the tax authorities and could be disregarded. So this particular section has raised a number of eyebrows from existing taxpayers. So the ask would be to allow or seamlessly allow existing taxpayers to also benefit from this section and not limit it only to new companies being set up.
I understand, Sarika, that there are asks that the industry has made with respect to section 194O, R as well as Q. If you can help us understand briefly in terms of what these sections are and what kind of simplification are you recommending at this point of time?
Sure, Anisha. So, these sections are recently sort of introduced. 194Q, 194R and 194O was always there, but there were some recent amendments happened in those sections. Now, 194Q essentially requires a deductor or a buyer of the goods to withhold tax when he's buying goods from some seller. Now, this section was never there, as in you generally don't require to do the withholding on these kind of sections, but the law required now us to do that. Likewise, there was a section 194R which was inserted, basically, which says that if you are paying some perquisite or a benefit to a resident during the business and profession of that person, then you have to withhold tax while making that benefit and perquisite payment to that person. Now, in our industry, if I look, these sections have become really relevant, and there are a lot of clarity that we as a business asks the government authorities here. For example, suppose in section 194R, when they say that you have to make a payment to offer benefit or a perquisite to a resident, you have to withhold tax. Now, it so happened that a lot of companies do provide these sample for testing purposes to a lot of distributors and customers. Now, these samples are being sent to them for not any, it's not in the form of a benefit or perquisite, but they are just being sent to take a feedback from the other person, whether the product is fine or not, whether we should manufacture it in this quality or not. It's not going to benefit him because he's not able to sell it further, and that person is not even using that for his own purpose. So, those kind of aspects are still included under 194R, and we are compulsorily required to withhold tax on those payments, on those benefits. So maybe government can look into these aspects that these are not actually in the form of perquisite, and they can exclude it from the purview of section 194R. Also, 194Q, which says that you have to do the withholding on any on the purchases that have been made by you. Now, the definition of goods is not like given in the act, and it's like a wide definition. It includes everything. And we come across of a situation wherein, these gifts and vouchers are being bought by the company to, say, given it to the distributors and those people. Now, sometimes on these kind of transactions, there is a double levy, we feel. When I'm buying these vouchers from the company, then I have to apply 194Q and withhold the TDS, because these are not expressly excluded from the definition of goods. And when I'm giving it to the distributor, I have to apply 194R because that may be considered as a benefit in their hands. So maybe government can clarify whether they are intending to cover both the legs of the transaction, or is it because what's happening on the same amount of income, tax withholding is happening twice. And also, on this particular aspect, they haven't actually clarified whether these vouchers, etc., would fall into the definition of goods or not. Because as per the GST regime, these are considered as like money instruments which are excluded from the purview of GST. So maybe similar kind of clarification can be given here in the Income Tax Act also in this budget.
Sure, let me bring in Raj as well. Raj, Rohinton pointed out about how the government is trying to make India a manufacturing hub. PLI schemes have been, announced as well. What is your expectation? What more can the government do to increase the capital expenditure and give India Inc. and Corporate Inc. that confidence that they're willing to provide a level playing field when it comes to exports as well? What's your own ask with respect to, let's say, expansion of the PLI schemes or some other measures to boost the capital expenditure and capex in the country?
Yeah, as far as giving a boost to service sector is concerned, Anisha, we have had a service export from India scheme which was introduced in Foreign Trade Policy 1520 a few years back, and this scheme was there for a few years, and then the scheme has not been extended for last couple of years time. Earlier, the scheme was available for all the service exporters, then the rate of the incentive which was available under this scheme was brought down from actually this was earlier 5% and then it was increased to 7%, but for the last couple of years time this scheme has not been extended, and in 2018 actually the amount of incentive was restricted to rupees 5 million, 50 million I'm sorry. So my request to the finance ministry here is that these kind of schemes should continue and the service sector should be given further boost so that they can contribute to the economy of India.
Okay, so extension of schemes not only for manufacturing but services as well, given the fact that it forms a large part of the Indian economy as well. Let's take some closing comments going then. Rohinton, let me first come to you. Any other wish list, any other ask or any other thing that you'll watch out for as far as the commentary of Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman is concerned on February 1st?
Sure. So one of the things that we are looking out for is detailed guidance on Pillar 2, which is a global movement to ensure that each jurisdiction is competitive in terms of tax. Many of the investments that actually come to India come through jurisdictions which are actually viewed as tax competition in terms of offering investors a rate significantly lower than 15%. And the Pillar 2 movement, which is sweeping the world just now, is something that is very much a part of India's overall tax agenda as well. And as India is now part of the G20, I see India driving that consensus on Pillar 2 as well, and I'm hoping that some parts of it will feature in this time's budget as well.
Oh, interesting. I'll watch out for those announcements as well. But Sarika, closing comments from you. Anything else that you are watching out for?
Sure, Anisha, thanks. I think, from an administrative point of view, what I feel is that any change that the government brings in, be it a TDS section of like a 194Q or a 194R, it appears to be very simple, like a simple withholding than one has to do. But thinking it from a company's perspective, I think because our IT systems and softwares are not readily equipped to make those changes to be called as a tax compliant software, we end up spending a lot of time and efforts and substantial cost in making our systems like that. So a request to the government that whenever these provisions are coming into picture, if those can be reduced to a maximum extent, if the tracking of TDS can be done through, say, a GST provision or AIS information, which the stamp duty authorities have to anyways file, they can sort of exclude those provisions from the TDS point of view. Because the ultimate, as Rohinton mentioned, the ultimate objective of putting the TDS provision is to keep a track of who's earning what and he reports it properly in the return. But if that kind of mechanism can be done through GST and other aspects and other provisions, then why not? And secondly, with this TDS and all these sections coming into picture, there's a lot of compliance which has come on the entity who's bearing all these burden, and which comes to a huge problem. At least in my company, I feel there's always a reconciliation issues that we face on the TDS TCS side, that you have to reconcile your books versus the form 26AS. So if government can provide some clarity on that, okay, take the TDS as per 26AS, you don't have to reconcile it with the books and all, because there are some practical challenges that all of us face. There are some carry forward amounts coming, there are some going forward which is going to be carried forward next year, and also the format in which our systems are made. So maybe government can give some relief on these aspects. It will be then a great relief for at least the Indian companies.
Or I guess the echo and the consensus that I'm hearing from Raj, Rohinton as well as Sarika is that there is need of a lot of C's, which is clarity, certainty as well as consistency. There are some C's which are a bit of a problem in terms of compliances, complexities as well as capital gains. So we have a lot to watch out for. Thank you so much guys for joining us today on the show and help us understand with respect to what the key asks are, what are the reasons for the same, and most importantly, what are the key things to watch out for as far as Union Budget 2023 is concerned. Appreciate you joining us on the show.